Welcome to the Outsmart Burnout podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Zarya Rubin, a functional medicine doctor, an international speaker, and a burnout badass because I've been there myself. After walking away from my own high-stress medical career, I discovered how to break free from burnout to reclaim my passion, purpose, and joy. And now I'm here to help you do the same. From science-backed tips to time-saving hacks, and hopefully some aha moments that just might change your life. So sit back, relax, and let's do this. Today's guest is Brooke Davis, a content creator, educator, and midlife relationship advocate with more than 20 years of experience in healthcare administration. She holds an MBA and brings a deep passion for psychology, research, and education to her work. After being diagnosed with PCOS in her 20s, Brooke began researching hormone health through the lens of fertility. But when she entered perimenopause in her late 50s and was told her symptoms were just stress, she began to ask deeper questions about her body, her emotions, and her marriage. And what she found was pretty eye-opening. Most couples aren't taught how hormone shifts affect mood, connection, and communication. And as friends and colleagues shared their stories of growing disconnection or unexpected divorce, Brooke realized that perimenopause wasn't just a personal health issue, it was a relationship issue too. So today, Brooke helps women and men understand the biological and emotional shifts of perimenopause so they can build hormone-informed marriages, relationships rooted in compassion, education, and teamwork. Her science-backed content is practical, clear, and focused on giving couples the tools they need to stay connected through the changes of midlife. I could not be more excited to have Brooke as a guest today because I feel like this is such a hot topic right now. And for women who are at the intersection of perimenopause and burnout, marriage can just be one of those things that is a bit of a powder keg. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm so glad that you're interested in the content that I create.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we found each other through the magic of Instagram. Yeah, so I touched a little bit on your background in the intro, but I would love to hear in your words just how you sort of became an expert in marriage and perimenopause. 'Cause it's a little unusual, but I think it's awesome.
It is a little unusual, and it was born out of personal experience. So, which typically, how most of this happens. But essentially, I've been working in healthcare for over 20 years, and a lot of the capacity that I have worked in has been in administrative leadership. And so that's working with, frontline team members, physicians, working with, operational leaders and things along those lines. And as I was working in a lot of different capacities, I ended up in the world of graduate medical education. And this is where I learned that a lot of our new doctors that are entering the healthcare system had very minimal education and knowledge about midlife women in general. And so I worked a lot with internal medicine and family medicine residents. And so my role was as a kind of like in a dyad leadership. So I worked with a physician leader that was their program director. I was their program manager. And so she oversaw their clinical, capacity and everything that they learned clinical. And I worked in the business role of it. However, we worked together to create like their educational content, their didactic lectures, and all those types of things. And as I started working in this role, and I, being a midlife woman, realized that these doctors just were not being prepared to take care of the women they were going to see in their clinics. And these were going to be the women that are going to be showing up in their late 50s, early 50s, and the 50s, moving into a new life transition.
I mean, I saw a stat recently that said like something like 80% of gynecologists don't get adequate training in perimenopause and menopause. It's like, what? It's like saying
Me,
OBGYN not getting trained in pregnancy. It's like,
yes.
okay, but even more so because every woman will go through perimenopause and menopause, and not every woman will be pregnant.
That's right. So it's not selective, I don't think. If you live long enough, I mean, you're going to outlive those
Right.
ovaries. And essentially, that's going to happen.
Ain't that the truth?
I have a niece that's in OBGYN residency right now, and I have verified that information with her and asked her on her rotations, she's going to have rotations on GYN, she's going to have rotations on OB, but I have said in your formal didactic lectures and training, what are you learning about, perimenopause, menopause, midlife, women, in that area. And she's only had about an hour lecture that just kind of said what menopause is and what the women are going through, in their body, not kind of what the symptoms are, not how do you treat it, nothing about like, you know, HRT, anything like that is being taught to
I
her.
mean, that's what I was taught in my medical training, and, of course, I would hope that it's better now, but you're really not giving me a lot of hope, and it was like, well, there's this magical moment in time where, there's no more eggs, and then you're in menopause, boom, and perimenopause? Do you think we talked about that? Did we learn about that?
Yeah.
Did we learn that it was like 10, possibly 10 years, 7 to 15 years? No, we didn't learn any of that.
So that's kind of, so she's verifying that she's going to graduate in a year. So she is in her third year of OBGYN and she has one more year. So she understands the importance of it and she is seeking out her own training, but this is not part of her clinical training. So that is kind of, frustrating in my mind. So
Oh
anyway,
my
my story
gosh.
continues that I figured out that I started having symptoms. I went to my personal OBGYN and was told, sorry, this is how it goes. You're just getting old. You just need to get less stress. You need to eat less and exercise more,
And at
all the
this point, you're
things.
in your 30s, right?
Yes, I'm in my late 30s, somewhere in that time. I'm getting told this information. So I'm frustrated, can't figure out what's going on with me. I feel terrible. I'm irritable. I'm yelling at my husband. I'm, snapping at my kids. There's socks in the floor and I'm mad as hell about it, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? This is not just PMS. It was just not PMS. It was way more than that. And so I just started digging, right? I started digging and learning and started doing some research. And then since I was in this role, with medical residents, I had access to all of these medical journals, all this information, actually experts too. I was actually able to reach out to people that are trained menopause experts and things like that. Because we wanted to bring this education. The program director happened to be a female that also had just went through menopause and she had a horrible experience and she was like, I'm a doctor and did not know this. Like I was floored myself of what was happening to me. And she even told me, she said, I felt so guilty for all the women that I saw in my clinic and just kind of said, I don't know what's going on with you. It's just okay. Let me give you an antidepressant, the normal, things. So it led me to believe that there was this issue, right? There was a gap, not only in education, but also like, why was I having this issue with my husband? Like, why are we all of a sudden like, we're okay, we're fine, we're getting along good, we raised children, we did all these fun things, and all of a sudden now I'm can't stand him and he's not doing really anything any different than what he'd been doing. And it just became to this head of a point one day in our kitchen. We were cooking together and it was a new recipe. I'd read the recipe, he'd read the recipe. He was doing half of it, I was doing half of it. And he said, hey, what's that next step? And I lost it. I basically said, if you can't read the recipe, then I don't know how to help you. And he just stopped what he was doing, and he just looked at me, and he was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna step away because I don't know what's going on." And then, of course, I beat myself up over it because that's not the normal reaction that I would have, like, it was awful. And I started talking to my girlfriends that are around my same age, and I was like, "Is this going on in your marriage too? Like, you just hate your husband all of a sudden? Like, is this normal?" And I was hearing this, and
Yup.
they were like, "Yes, it's normal, and, he's on my nerves, and this is not going right." And some of my girlfriends were like, "I'm getting divorced, and I'm separating." Like, it was that serious.
Divorce rates skyrocket in perimenopause and menopause, isn't that right? I just learned this
Do.
recently.
They do. I actually did just a little research before we jumped on here because I was like, yeah, I know this will probably come up. The women in the age group of 40 to 54 actually have the highest divorce rates now. And, right now, by the age of 55, about 40% of women have experienced at least one divorce.
Mm,
And so it's kind of prevalent around this time that this is happening. And, it's kind of called a meno divorce or a gray divorce. Really, when I think of gray divorce, I'm thinking probably anything over 50. So
right.
this age group of doing diffusion into the mid 50s is probably, this group that we're seeing that are having the higher divorce rates right now.
Mm,
And
well,
so it's pretty interesting. And I think that's what kind of got me onto this subject. It was like, hello, if my friends are having this happen, I'm having this happen, this is global. This is
Yeah.
not just, just this one little piece of our life. And so I started doing a lot more research. There's not a huge amount of research, but the research that's out there is kind of, I'm kind of pulling it from, kind of relationship research and then also looking at the medical research and then kind of pulling some of the in between stuff of like, okay, so when someone goes through a change, a medical change, how does that impact their relationship? Well, you're kind of finding all these little pieces and parts and just kind of started putting it together and like, okay, if we as women don't know kind of what's happening to us and why we're having these changes, like why we're feeling this way because we're going to our doctors and we're told, you're just getting old, just deal with it. We're getting this advice that's really not helping us. Then no wonder our relationships are suffering. And I chose to focus on marriage because that was the most, to me, that was my most closest relationship in my life. And
Mm.
yes, it probably did impact my kids and somewhat still impacts my kids a little bit. But there's a difference, I think, with your children on, how you kinda relate to your spouse versus your children. And although I might snap at my kids, it's not the same as, like, damaging, like, things that I might say in my relationship to my husband and not mean it. And I think that was what was so frustrating, I think, to that point. So that's how I landed on kind of, digging into this research, finding out what's going on. And then I was like, okay, I've got to share this. I need to share this with other women so that they know. I need to share this with other men. And, I'm finding some other accounts that, there are men that are learning more about menopause and perimenopause and understanding, trying to learn how to support their wives, which is wonderful, and
Yeah,
I'm
I've come
happy.
across some of those accounts and I'm like, "You go."
I know,
Like,
and I'm
they're
just
saying,
so
"Guys, we need
happy.
to step it up. Like, we need to be more informed and
Yeah.
we need to understand this." And it's not just, "Oh, my wife's annoying," or, "Oh, my wife's
Yes.
crazy." It's like, if I don't think they really understand, and if they had to go through what we go through, I mean, I don't think they would be able to handle it, quite frankly. I mean, they
And
don't go
and
through periods, they don't go through pregnancy, they don't go through childbirth, they don't go through menopause. They just have no clue
no,
what
and they
that's
don't.
like to be kind of held hostage by your hormones to some extent.
Are, and you are, right? And especially if, as I was thinking about through my growing up period and the times that we were introduced in health class to the, puberty, the menstrual period, and pregnancy, it was really more along the lines of like, hey, you're going to get a period every month. It's going to suck. You need to hide it. You need to have tampons. You don't need to tell anybody about it because it's shameful. And then, and then,
Right, that part too. The shame.
And then it said, "Now, hey, now don't get pregnant. So this is what we need you to know about pregnancy is don't get pregnant." And it's like, okay, here's what you need to do to not get pregnant. And that was what we were kind of led to believe. It wasn't like, like it wasn't anything like how to take care of yourself during this time. It was just more
No.
like, here's what's going to happen to you. Here's what
Yeah.
you just need to do to be prepared to take care of it. And so I grew up never really understanding cycles. And then so when I knew I was going to have a period, but I didn't understand what happened in each of the cycles. I didn't know, like, I understood what quote unquote PMS was, but I didn't know how to tie it to my cycle and understand it and understand how to deal with my cramps and all these things. And so when you're not given that knowledge and information, you just start thinking something's wrong with you. So evidently, everybody has this problem. It's a period, and you had it. And then so you grow up and then you kind of try to get pregnant in your point in life. And then I found out I had PCOS, which made it more difficult. So I started researching how I could get pregnant. Here I was in my late 20s trying to figure out how I can get pregnant.
Right, right. I always joke that I spent my entire life worrying, like trying not to get pregnant. And then I didn't meet my husband until I was 40. So
Yeah.
then I was like, well, that was a waste of time trying, really focusing on that. And then we sort of joked that like, well, I guess the reason that we're still married and we're not divorced is because like we got married so late that maybe we skipped over that part and like we're just, trying to make it work. But
Yeah.
and then, got very lucky in my 40s and did have my daughter. But yeah, it is really this kind of like paradox of
It is. It is.
extremes.
It is, and so I do have to say there's some hope there because my son that's 21, him and his girlfriend track her period together, and they have learned, like, how like, what happens during each, part of the cycle. They've looked up some things on, like, even Instagram on, like, what they should cook and eat. They looked at, like, how, like, she needs more alone time during this time frame, and during this time, she has a lot more energy, and this is when they should go and do some stuff. I mean, I'm like,
Okay.
wow, I am
Damn.
just floored. Yeah,
You did a great job.
well, it really wasn't me, it was them because still even up until, really understanding till I got like, when I was trying to get pregnant, right? So I did all the things to get pregnant, but then when perimenopause hit me, I didn't know what was gonna happen. I didn't know that this stuff was just gonna crash through the ground. Like, I didn't understand what happened when your hormones went away.
Hey, are you listening to the show right now and quietly nodding along, thinking, yeah, this sounds just like me? You're exhausted, but you can't stop. You're not sleeping, and you're definitely never actually resting. You keep telling yourself you just need to get through this next thing, the next deadline, the next quarter, the next season of life, and then you'll slow down, maybe even take a vacation. But that moment never comes. If this sounds like you, I want you to know two things. One, you are not broken. And two, I've got you. I'm Dr. Zarya Rubin, and I created the Burnout Blueprint specifically for this moment. The moment you finally admit something needs to change, but you have no idea where to start, and it feels like there's no time in your busy schedule to fit anything in, even healing. The Burnout Blueprint is a 90-minute session, just you and me, where we figure out exactly what's going on in your nervous system, and I hand you a personalized plan to start feeling like yourself again. No guessing games, no generic advice, just clarity and a real next step. Head over to drzaria.myflowdesk.com. The link is in the show notes. And for a limited time, I'm offering $100 off to the first 10 clients. I can't wait to start this next chapter with you. Yeah, well, I mean, it's also the wild fluctuations. I think there is a bit of a misconception out there that, perimenopause, menopause, it means like all of a sudden you got no hormones. And it's like that's actually not true, and that the fluctuations and the swings are even more wild than in PMS.
Think that is where a lot of people get that information from is thinking that it's just I'm having more PMS or, I'm having more of this or more of that. And that is definitely not what's happening. And a lot of people say, well, it's just PMS 2.0. That's not what's happening.
It's a whole other level. And then, your doctor said to you, oh, it's just stress. So why do you think they said that to you and what was, going on? And I think that there's like also this intersection between what's happening in life for women in this phase of, work becomes more demanding. You're getting promotions. You're, at the peak of your career. You've got kids to manage. You've got aging parents to manage. You've got all these different things. And it's just, and then perimenopause hits you and you're like, okay. And that's when the whole stress and burnout comes in too. And you have this kind of perfect storm.
I totally agree with you. It's kind of like a trifecta effect, on a lot of these, different things that kind of show up, and just like, and then talking about like, on the levels of it. So kind of for me, when I was talking to her about it, like, I was in a job at the hospital that was pretty demanding. Yes, it was, but it wasn't just that. I was giving her a lot of different symptoms now that I know from what I've done from research and learned about were definitely signs of early perimenopause. And I just really think that, based upon her experience, her clinical experience, and then maybe, and of course, her training, she was at the point of life at that time, but she was probably getting close to retirement age, and that she kind of basically, kind of told me, like, hey, this happened to me too. And this is what, my experience and talking with others is that, what we've collectively agreed upon is that you've got to reduce your stress. And if you don't want to gain weight, you just have to eat less food. And if you have migraines, which I did, if you have migraines, I can
Mm,
give you some medicine for that. And, if you're not coping well, I can give you an antidepressant. That was kind of the standard treatment at that time. And that
mm.
was like, what, 12, 13 years ago.
Right, because the HRT was not being
No, nobody's
offered to
talking about
women.
that at all, then. And that was just kind of just the regular, I think, is here's how we're going to treat this. It really wasn't anything else. It was kind of just like, here's what you should probably do for yourself. And, also just even in the diet area,
Mm,
it wasn't really explained to me. Like, I really needed to be looking at the way I was eating and nourishing my body needed to change. Like, it
mm.
wasn't the same as like when I was younger and I could eat whatever and that was not even discussed. And when I kind of learned about that piece of it, I was like, holy cow, I was probably feeding into a lot of my symptoms, pun intended, really.
But it's so interesting, like, what you've just described is what often happens when women sometimes go to healthcare providers and they have a whole litany of symptoms, and it's like, "Let's treat this individual symptom on its own." And then each symptom gets its own treatment, and none of it is related or put together, and it's like, it's all connected. This was all related to perimenopause and to your hormonal fluctuations. It wasn't like, oh, you have a migraine problem and you have a depression problem and you have a weight problem and you have a marriage problem and you have a stress problem. It's like, it is all connected. And I think finally we're putting those puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to me, it sounds, like I'm hearing a lot from other people now that are actually getting care that is more inclusive than just the symptom related care. I did go to a primary care doctor after that, and I explained things that were going on with that too. And she said, well, let's just run a bunch of labs. And of course, they all came back fine. They were all within range. "Oh, well, your labs were great." And I was having heart palpitations. And she said, "Well, let's go ahead, and let's see if we can get you a stress test." So she said, "Do you feel faint?" I was like, "No, I don't really feel faint." She's like, "You feel faint. Okay, you can have a stress test."
You felt faint, trust me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was like, "Okay, I'm faint." Of course, that came back just fine. Well, nobody talks about how when estrogen fluctuates and how when it dips and, all that you can have heart palpitations. And I was thinking,
Absolutely.
"Okay, I'm having a heart attack." And then, other things would come up, right? So I would just go see her on a symptom based, right? And she would just say, "Okay, well, let's just talk about this symptom." Okay, great. And then, of course, my cholesterol went through the roof. And then, of course, my
Right.
blood pressure was up, like all these things. And they're like, well, let's just see if you change your diet. I'm like, well, I don't, okay, I'm not eating any different than what I was. Why had my cholesterol changed? So lots
Mm.
of things. But anyway, like
So
this
when
kind
did
of
they
led me to
finally put
understand.
it all together that this was actually early onset,
It really took, like,
perimenopause?
5 years for everybody
Oh my
to
gosh.
and plus my own research of just understanding and finally taking it to a doctor, laying it out there and say, "I think I'm in perimenopause due to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." And basically they said, "Well, let me look it up." And they looked it up and
My
they said,
goodness.
"I think we can give you this diagnosis." And I was like, "Well, how can you help me?" And they said, "Well, I think you're doing all the right things to manage it." And I was like, "But no, I'm going crazy. I mean, I don't think
Oh
you
my god.
understand that. I'm going
And
crazy."
still no one ever offers you hormones at this point.
No, still not yet. No,
Oh my
no.
god.
I
Oh my
finally
god.
ended up finding, I actually went to Midi Health a couple years ago, about,
Yeah.
you know, 2 and a half, 3 years ago. I ended up going to Midi Health and getting, really focused care on perimenopause. And, my thyroid was tanked. Nobody ever checked
Of
that
course,
out.
no one checked that you've got massive weight gain and hypercholesterolemia. So, luckily, I have a lot of additional training in functional medicine, and they teach us that the number one cause of hypercholesterolemia in, you know, midlife women, low thyroid.
Thyroid.
And then also in women of a certain age related to perimenopause. So that's like the number one thing they teach us. It's like, women with very high cholesterol doesn't tend to go hand in hand. Check the thyroid.
I did get on, thyroid medication and my cholesterol is down. And so see, I mean, but all these things we had to put all these pieces together and I
And
actually had to
hormones, I mean,
present.
people don't realize how people think of estrogen as like a reproductive hormone. And sure, it is, but it's almost like every freaking part of your body that there's the estrogen receptors, and it's we say that it's a neuromodulator. It is highly implicated in the stress response, which people don't realize. So that is why the things that we used to be able to handle and tolerate, all of a sudden you hit perimenopause, that shit doesn't work anymore, and all bets are off. And then that's when we end up in burnout. And I can only imagine what that's doing to marriages. So tell us a little bit more about like what you've uncovered and what, because we say with burnout and perimenopause, at least I say that perimenopause doesn't cause burnout per se, but it definitely unmasks it.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. So I did do a piece of content several months back, and it was kind of about like what happens when the estrogen veil lifts, right? Well, we know there's more than just estrogen of things that are happening, but it was just kind of like, what can I use that could kind of help women see like what's going on at this point in time. So the estrogen veil is lifting. And, that exposes a lot of things about us as women. A lot of times we are caregivers, we are people pleasers, and we are the people that are always constantly managing other people in our life, whether that be ourselves, our children, our jobs, our friendships, all these types of things. And, when we get into this point in life and, our hormones are changing and shifting and then all these things, all of a sudden things kind of get brought to the forefront and you start evaluating things like, wait a minute, why am I the person that's always keeping this thing running? Or, hey, wait a minute, why am I the person that's always the emotional anchor of our family? Or, hey, wait a minute, why am I always given extra work at work just because I'm good at it? I think it really exposes things, in your life that are going on that you're like, I need to put some attention on this. Do I really want to keep doing this? Why am I
Mm,
allowing this to happen? Why did I allow that to happen? How long have I carried that? We start asking all these questions, right? And so I think it's definitely a not a breaking point, but maybe a bend in the curve for a lot of women that we get to this point that we're like, wait a minute. I have been the person that has been solely responsible for X or this or that, in my marriage. I know a lot of people, do talk about a lot of the emotional load that women carry, the mental load that women carry. And
mhm.
that is a huge burden, on ourselves, but also, kind of the relationship. And we start questioning things. And that's kind of what I'm seeing. And actually from women that I've talked to is it's an awakening. It's kind of like it exposes cracks in your marriage of things that maybe you're not going to keep putting up with anymore, essentially, or that you don't want to do anymore. And
Yeah.
that exposure creates this crack, and it kind of shows like, hey, where are you going to step up at? Where are you going to step down from? Like, this is not working for me. That's what I'm seeing. And that is very vivid. Most of the things that I'm talking to women
Yeah,
about.
I mean, I totally agree, and, we actually have a great podcast episode. I think it's episode 2, of we have Paige Connell on. She is a page turner on Instagram, and she is a specialist in the mental load and, unpaid emotional labor and just the all of that, and so that's check out that episode, folks. I'll put it in the show notes, but yeah, so I mean, that definitely comes to the forefront when you have little kids, but even when you have older kids and you just realize that, yeah, why am I doing all the things? And there's this emotional labor, and why am I planning all the date nights? Why am I doing all the emotional lift, you know?
And I think, also, for women, just in general, I think, especially as high functioning women, we are constantly on all the time and we don't allow ourselves to rest. Midlife actually demands that. And if we're not willing to give in to that type of rest and recognize that we need it and our body needs it, then I think we also put ourselves sometimes in a situation where we create our own overload, in a case kinda hits like a wall. That's what I tell people. It's like, I was doing really good up until, like, 38. Like, I was killing it, man, like, I had a good career, like, I was moving up, like, I was excited what I was doing, my kid, I had kids, like check the box on that one, had a good marriage, check the box on that one, had a brand new car, check the box on that one, like all the things,
You're
doing
checking all
it.
the boxes.
Yeah, like doing it. And then all of a sudden it was like, bam. It's like, couldn't do that anymore. And then I was mad at myself. Like, why can't I do this anymore? Like, why is this happening to me? Why am I not able to take on, this new job? Like, why am I not able to do that? So you beat yourself up internally
Mhm.
and not understanding what was happening to my body and then feeling bad, feeling bad that I couldn't do it all.
Yeah, there's a lot of identity shifts that happen, and I mean, it's like you don't feel like yourself, you don't look like yourself, your brain stops working, That was the thing for me. I was just like, "Oh my god, my brain is sort of my livelihood, and I rely on it for everything, and I've always had, like, a photographic memory." My brain just completely decided to go on vacation. It was like I used to joke that I, like, took my brain out, put it in a blender, put it back in.
I know,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
hard to describe that, like, feeling
Yeah.
confident and to be like you're saying, like, on top of your game, if in medicine, like, everybody has expectations of you, right? You're the
Yeah.
doctor, you should know everything, and then all of a sudden you can't remember the terminology for neuro pathway of some sort or something, you're like, "I don't know what it is.
Right.
It's in your brain."
The brain thing, yeah,
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 right. And then yeah, and
it's
then, like, talking to people and forget mid-sentence what you're trying to say, and then you're like, "Whoa." And then you start worrying you have early onset dementia, and then
right,
you start scaring yourself. So, it is
it's
huge,
wild.
and, like, yeah, talking about that identity shift, I think that's something that is also, like, hard to grasp with too. Like, you kind of grieve, like, maybe kinda who you were, but then you kinda have this point of time of, like, "Well, who do I wanna be?" You
Mhm,
know? Where do I wanna go? And I think that impacts marriage too, because when you get
mm,
to that point in time, you're kinda making these changes and making these decisions. And a lot of men, maybe they have a midlife crisis, I don't know what they have, but I don't follow that for women. I usually call it midlife clarity because it's usually about making decisions. It's usually about deciding some things that you haven't decided on in your past. And, I think men see that as a threat. Like,
mm,
"Oh, you're gonna change and leave me behind," or "You're gonna change and you're not the same woman that I married," or
mhm,
these types of
mhm,
things, and I think
yep,
that's scary in a relationship, and my relationship actually went through that, because I was like,
mm,
"I want a new job. Like, I want something different. Like, I wanna research this stuff that I'm really finding interesting." And to my husband, like, that wasn't quite interesting to him,
mm,
Even though he's a biologist by training, but also, he's also a CPA by training, it's like these different things.
wow.
So it's kinda like, I found it interesting and he didn't. And, so it was kind of hard for us to be like, get excited, about that. So that was a little challenging. And I see that happen in some other my friends' marriages, like things that they got their passion for and set on
Yeah.
fire. Their husband, not that they didn't support it, they just aren't interested in it. And so that I think is kind of hard when you don't have that partner to support you. Like when you're fired up and excited about something and you want to share it and they're like, okay.
And so there's this a bit of a mismatch of like you're finding this new identity, you're all excited about it, and your husband maybe wants things to stay the way they were. And then on the other hand, you're also all the things that maybe you used to like about him or maybe that you used to tolerate are now driving you crazy. So when you put those things together, and then let's talk about the elephant in the room, shall we? Sex and intimacy and how that goes out the window in perimenopause and menopause as well, oftentimes. And so you add all that together and then the exhaustion factor. And it's like, yeah, that's the perfect storm too.
Desire for women is not the same as desire for men. Men are a little more spontaneous, we're a little more responsive, in how we get desire, and we know it's in the brain. And we know moods are in the brain. And so if we're not having all of these nice hormones that our brain's used to, and we're not having all these inputs of maybe emotional safety, maybe not feeling like we're being seen or heard, maybe, not also being kind of loved the way that we normally like to be loved. you can't just expect us to perform in the bedroom. I mean, it's completely different. And, one of my friends told me one time, she said, okay, think about desire. Like, okay, men is like a microwave. Like you can heat something up fast. And women, they're like an oven. And how long does it take to preheat, And I was
My
like,
goodness.
that makes a lot of sense. It certainly does.
Does. That
But
is hilarious.
and men don't really, like, necessarily lose desire and mood, they don't really have that impact, unless maybe they do suffer from lower testosterone or something,
Mm,
but that is more easily remedied, from what I understand and what I've read in medical literature, than it is to help women, with that, responsiveness and things like that. And, I've listened to some great episodes kinda here lately. There was some on Dr. Mary Clay Haver, she had something kinda recently
mm.
on mood and desire and those types of things. Makes a lot of sense when you start listening to it of like, "Wow, okay, I understand that," but explaining that to your partner is kinda challenging, and to kinda say like, "Well, I'm not in the mood," how many times are you gonna say you're not in the mood, right? And that
Right.
was our problem. I was never in the mood, like, that was
Well,
just not.
I mean, you can't really be, like, irritable and aroused at the same time.
Exactly. I didn't feel good, I didn't
Yeah,
feel
well,
good
yeah.
for the longest time. Also, I couldn't get the things out of my head, kinda like what you're talking about, like, couldn't let
Mm,
go of the to-do list, couldn't let go of, "Did I take care of that email?" Couldn't let go of that just to relax, and I think that that's another piece of it, is that we don't know how to relax a lot of times, and having hormones kind of fluctuating up and down, it kind of increases anxiety sometimes, it kind of irritability sometimes,
sleep.
complete emotional shutdown sometimes. I mean, there's sometimes I would just feel nothing, like
Mhm, mhm.
emotionless. People would say something, I'm like, okay, like it's just weird to feel like that.
Well, it's the reason they say that, perimenopause for women, it unlocks the, like, no Fs left to give,
It does,
right?
it does. I mean, it just amazes me that how many people don't understand the hormone connection. And this is not anything new. I mean, we've known about hormones for how long? Forever, but just no one's really kind of put the pieces and parts together to
Yeah.
say, like, hey, this is how you could feel. This is what it could be like. I mean, just thinking about all the mental health symptoms that come with it. I mean, we're at such a risk for depression, and even suicide goes up during this time of our life.
Yes.
And
Yes, I
that
have read that. Oh my goodness. Well, it is, and I love the fact that we're shedding more light on this and bringing more attention to it, and it's all over, social media and news media, and I love that you focus on women, but you also focus on partners, and so you help people on both sides of the relationship make changes or make adjustments or make, allowances for these shifts, and so what are some ways that a partner could be supportive in perimenopause?
like with the basics. We have to have a basic level of understanding and education. Before you can support somebody, right? No matter what it is, that you have to have an understanding of what's happening. And, I liken it to like any other kind of medical condition. If your spouse, ended up with diabetes, I bet you would go read everything about diabetes and you would probably try to figure out, oh, okay, this is how we need to make sure that, we have our food. This is how we need to make sure we exercise together. This is how we need, all these things, right, to support. And so I liken it to that. It's like, if there was any other kind of medical condition that your spouse was diagnosed with, you know, do the research first and together. I think a lot of times the onus is put on the woman to learn everything she can and then educate her partner. And yes, that is probably going to happen. That's what happened with me, right? I learned everything. I educated my partner about it. I told him what's going on with me, but also he did his own research too, right? He read about it as well. And he wanted to make sure that he understood it from both sides because I am going to highlight what I think is the most important for him to know right now. And he may not, he might need to understand a little bit better. And so
Right.
just doing that part, that's the first piece of support, right? Learning. And then the second part is I always tell couples at this point in life, you have to evaluate how you support each other now. Because what happened maybe earlier in your marriage, or maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, ever how long, right? The way that you supported each other then is going to be different now. Like capacity has changed. And that is something I was really hard to deal with for me, really, was that I did not have the capacity that I used to have.
Mhm.
And, I couldn't quite express that to my husband. Like, I couldn't get him to kinda understand that all of a sudden, like, I just couldn't go 100 miles per hour anymore, and it frustrated me, but it was also frustrating him too. Like, "What do you mean? Like, we used to do this every weekend. What do you mean? We can't go to the grocery store and then go do this and go do that, and then you wanna
Mhm,
lay down
mhm.
and sleep for 4 hours. Like, why?"
Yep.
You know? And so talking about certain types of things, right? Like whatever support is like that one was capacity. The next one is, how do we run the household? A lot of people do get roles assigned to them in marriage that maybe just because they were better at something or just because maybe they were a certain gender. We know certain things kind of fall to certain genders as well. And maybe reevaluating that, maybe reevaluating who can do what, maybe reevaluating how you do it. Maybe you have to outsource it, whatever some things might be, and being honest, about that part. And then, just other different type of support, whatever it is. And then talking about how do we stay close? Because I think that's another piece that people actually don't think about. What is it that makes us feel close now? And it doesn't have to be, intimacy, it's like how do we text each other a couple times a day? Do we sit down at night and take 10 minutes just to kind of debrief today? What are those types of things that make us feel close and commit to that?
Mm.
Because if you don't have, the patterns of kind of keeping that closeness, it's very easy to drift apart during this time of life.
Yeah, you fall into bad habits and the kids kinda take precedence, and then at a certain point, like, you become an empty nester, and that all often coincides with perimenopause and menopause, and then it's like, "Oh, who even is this person?"
And it turns into roommate energy is kind of, what it really kind of turns into. Your co-household managers, essentially, if you don't put that attention to it. And I also talk about like whatever it is that kind of set your soul on fire before you guys went and tackled careers or had kids or did whatever. Like, what was it you put on the shelf? Right. And said, well, we've got to put this back because we've got to put our attention on children or careers or whatever it is that we know set our soul on fire. Go back and find what that was. Does it still light you guys up? Is it still something you want to do? Like, look at those things and actually plan out a few things that will keep your connection. Like, we try to plan for us like in every like Saturday, especially when the farmers market's in. Like, we're gonna go get some groceries at the farmers market, but also we're using it as time just to be us together. Talk to different people, and kind of share and just kind of do that as us as a couple. So I think those things are huge because not only is your capacity changing, not only is your, different things that are going on in your mind and your body changing, but if you're not committed to making that. And then kind of like I love what the Gottmans say, and they talk a lot of bit about like having a weekly check-in. And a weekly check-in is just to kind of sit down, review, hey, what felt good this week? What was hard? What do you need from me this week? And what will make next week better? And commit to doing that. That changed our relationship a lot when we sat down because I was really just focusing on what was happening to me and then kind of what was pushing to the outside of my relationship. But hearing my husband say things to me of what he felt like went good or what didn't go good or what he needs from me, I was like, I didn't even know that. Like I didn't even like take that into knowledge that you would need that from me or that you wanted that from me or you desired that, and I was like, I never really thought that I would know those things. And I didn't. And it just kind of showed me like, hey, like this, like I have really been focusing a lot on what's going on with me and really haven't paid attention to what was going on with you. And that's
Yeah,
huge.
I mean, the Gottmans, I believe it's kind of ironic, the Gottmans refer to that, I believe, as State of the Union, which is taking place on the day that we're recording this, and that kind of brings me into my next topic, which is moving from the microcosm of relationships and those unique dynamics to the macro level of society and what we're seeing right now. I feel is an unusual time, and it's placing some unusual stressors on relationships. And that is the kind of the unmasking of all of the unspoken misogyny and patriarchy. And, we had the whole Me Too movement. And then now we've got these Epstein files, which are absolutely horrific. And then, we've got this meme that's circulating that, if women had a choice to go out in the wilderness with a stranger, a man they don't know, versus a grizzly bear, women choose the bear. So, what does this all mean for, and I know this whole episode has been very focused on heterosexual relationships because I feel like same sex relationships, well, if it's two men, they don't have this perimenopause problem. If it's two women, hopefully they have a much better understanding. Now, of course, they've got double the dose, but, so it has been kind of, narrow focus. But what do we do to navigate this unprecedented kind of time in history where there's so much tension between the sexes? And then, literally this week we saw like the men's Olympic hockey team versus the women's Olympic hockey team, and that has just, for me, I feel like it often causes some resentment in my own marriage.
Kind of thinking to that too, yes. And I think also too, and I've even seen these memes too, but it actually really gets to the gut of things, is that women in my age group and your age group, it's kind of identifying, I think, a lot really with Gen X right now. And Gen X is saying, so you're going to do this to me, being a Gen X, going through perimenopause or into menopause, and the world's going to do this to me. You were going to
I
burn
don't think
out.
so. Yeah. You messed with the wrong women at the wrong time, the wrong generation of women at the wrong time. Let me tell you.
Exactly. And so I feel it too. I feel it too. Like I just kind of like even back before Christmas, I just kind of had this deep aching of feeling like something's not right with our world right now. And I
Hmm.
had always
Yeah.
been someone that yes, I wanted to use my voice and I wanted to speak up for people. But however, I did it in a more of a quiet manner, I guess you could say, the way decided to spend my money, the way I decided to volunteer, the way I decided to support things, was different. But I think now it's like, it's time to be loud, ladies.
Time to
It's
be loud.
time to express what we're feeling. And I think that it's just an uprising. I really do. And I certainly hope that we can collectively use our voices for the good of what's going on. There's a lot of strange, unprecedented things going on. And it's very emotionally taxing, I think, sometimes to get on Instagram or other social medias. And sometimes I have to stop myself because I can feel it building up that I feel like to the point where I want to explode. And so then taking that information and sharing it, with their spouses, and they don't have the same response that maybe they do.
Yes.
Right? They don't
Oh
feel
my
fired
goodness.
up about it. They don't feel like
Yes.
and they're like, "Well, why are you going so crazy over this?" And my husband's having a hard time with it too because I've always been that person like, okay, I'll see something and I'm like, "Oh, that's terrible. I hate that," whatever. And then but now I'm like, I can't let it go. Like I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm so
Mhm.
mad and I'm so frustrated. I'm sad and I have grief and I have anger about it. And I think for him, he's like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, like not sure
Yes.
how to
Are
process
we
that.
married to the same guy? And then
We might be.
I also feel like there's this real discrepancy in that they just don't know what it is like. They don't have that same physical threat of violence or lack of sense of safety
Yeah.
that we have had our entire lives. I mean, ask any woman if she's been, you know, mistreated or violated in some way and at what age that first happened. I mean, it's shocking. And I just don't think men fully appreciate the weight of that. And I think it's finally all starting to come out in the wash.
I think so. And I think that the more collective voices that are speaking about it, I think it's something that just can't be washed away anymore. And that's just kind of something I think as girls we're kind of taught like don't dress that way because you could cause, someone to want to hurt
Right.
you.
That it's our fault. Well, she was wearing a short skirt. No, we're not accepting this anymore. Like that, we're
Exactly. And
done. We're
yes.
done. We are not
Why would
accepting
you be
this.
at a bar drinking? You know you could have gotten roofied. No, normal people don't roofie normal people. But anyway, if you want to think that.
Yeah.
So it's
So I
always
think as a mom of boys, I know you're raising boys, and so I think that's where the amazing opportunity lies, is that we are hopefully raising a new generation of men who are gonna know better and do better.
just talking about it like, hey, like you have some privilege. You really do, in this world. And as women, we don't have that privilege of just being able to park our car wherever we want to in a parking lot and walk back out to it at
Right.
night. No, we have to put our keys between our fingers
Right. I don't think my husband has ever he's like, "What do you mean key between your fingers?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's
because
exactly
we're
what
going to
I'm
have to
talking
stab
about.
somebody.
You don't know what I'm talking about, and that is the point."
Exactly. And, we're having to buy pepper spray and we're having to have all these things to keep us protected.
And it's just like, well, that's just a part of life. We just have to accept it. And it's like, no, we're done. We're done. We're not.
We don't wanna do that. And so I think yeah, I think our spouses are having a hard time, and so I think that,
Yeah.
kind of saying, like, "Why are you raging about this?" And I'm like, Because I can't be quiet anymore. Like, I just
Yeah.
can't." And I
And
think it's just
so how do
vibing.
we manage, like, we have all this, rage against the patriarchy writ large, but then, you know, when it carries over into our home lives and our marriages, like, how do we help mitigate that with our husbands so that we're not raging at them all the time?
Exactly. And I think it's kinda having these conversations around of why we feel like this, and like you're saying, you explaining, but it's also like, well, what can you do to help me feel like, like this is something that is of importance? What can you do, to make me feel like this is something that's worth talking about and worth discussing? And there's gonna be a lot of times they're gonna say, it's just not my thing. I don't really, really care for that. So I don't think I have a perfect answer. I know in
Mm,
my situation, speaking with my husband, it was like, here's why I feel like that. And I don't expect you to completely understand it, but this is why I feel this way. And I
mm,
start using it in language like, all the time now. Like we speak about something, and he'll say, oh, something happened. And I don't do this to be quite mean, but I do. And I say, oh, was it a man that did that you're talking about? And he says,
mm,
"Yes, it was." I say, "Oh, okay, I can understand why that woman was upset or frustrated or whatever." I try to
mhm.
bring it in to just kinda demonstrate and kinda show that
Yeah, draw attention to it, and also I think the validation piece is really important, like, even if they can't necessarily relate, even if they don't necessarily agree, if they can validate our experience and what we our lived experience, what we have gone through, what we are basing our reactions on, and I think that goes a long way in a marriage.
yeah, it does, because 'cause we're not gonna agree on 100% of everything, or we're not the same
Mm-mm.
people, and we do have different beliefs about certain things, and just like, my son is, 18, 19, and he's trying to defend himself as a man, right? And he's like, "Well, mom, not all, not women are bad too." And I'm like, yeah, they are. There are some bad women out there. I get it." I was like, "I get it." But right now, what I'm trying to teach you collectively is that, that women, consistently have to be vigilant. And it's
Yeah.
because men have a privilege, of
Yes,
that.
historically, there's been a big problem, and of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but
Yeah,
it's a rule
exactly.
for a
There sure
reason.
are. Yeah, they sure are
Yeah.
for a reason. And,
My goodness.
it's interesting, and so, just like you said, teaching and instilling in our kids now, that we don't have the same outcome, that, like, we teach equals, and it's so interesting to watch my older son that's, getting ready he's 21, getting ready to turn 22 with his girlfriend, and watching how he treats her, and watching how he looks out for her, and how he, just cares for her is a little different than what I grew up seeing at the way that men cared for women. And he doesn't objectify women, which I think is so important. And my youngest son doesn't either. And like
Okay, you're giving me a lot of hope right now.
they do not objectify. And it's so wonderful to see it. And because their dad doesn't, and so that was really modeled from their dad. And, they don't look at women as an object, and they don't look at women for what they can get from them. They're looking
Yeah.
at how it actually adds to their life, and that's what I try to tell them all the time. If it doesn't add to your life, then, don't try to force it, don't try to push it, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
If you think what education you want, but it doesn't jive with you, then you don't force it. And I was like, same thing with relationships. If you can't add to you and don't collectively, desire that, don't force it. There's nothing wrong with that. My youngest said, I might not get married, mom. I said, that's okay. You don't have to. That's totally fine. And my oldest is like, I'm getting married. Can I get married soon? I was like, well, why don't you get through college first? Let's get you this goal first. And let's get your job.
Oh my goodness. Listen, Brooke, I could talk to you all day long. This topic is so fascinating. We've been talking for almost an hour. But so there is a little section that I like to do at the end of the interview, and it's called the rapid fire round, where I ask you quick questions and you just kind of give me your gut response. And so, morning person or night owl?
Morning.
Okay. Has that changed in midlife or you've always been a morning person?
Always been more alert in the mornings. As soon as like right after you and I will get off of here, I will go crash for the rest of the night.
See, I'm the complete opposite, and I feel like it's only gotten worse in perimenopause. I want to be a morning person so bad, but oh my goodness. Okay.
I love it.
Coffee or tea?
Tea. Definitely tea.
Tea.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a period where I had to cut out coffee in perimenopause because I had such bad anxiety and palpitations. And I was like, okay, no coffee for years. I cut it out. Now I'm
Uh,
so happy. I brought coffee back and it's good. But yeah.
So
What is your favorite way to reconnect with your partner?
So what I think, and it's actually the novelty of actually planning the trip is the funnest part. And going on the trip is fun, but it's more like, hey, what do you want to do? Look what I found. I found this exciting little, place we could go tour. Oh, here's some food we got to eat while we're there. So I think like that is our way of connection. So we plan a lot of trips together. And I think it's that getting to that point of the trip that we actually are super close during that time. Going on the trip, it's more like, okay, we've already done the work. Let's kind of relax and just go with the vibe and then go eat at this restaurant we said.
I love travel, so I absolutely love that. Okay. What is one word you would use to describe midlife?
Let's think. I have several, but to describe it in general, I think it is an evolution.
Okay, I love that. The word that came to mind for me, I was like, roller coaster. I prefer evolution. Okay, that's awesome. Let's see. Biggest misconception about perimenopause and marriage.
It's not going to impact your relationship.
Ding, 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 ding. Yep. Okay, if listeners take away just one thing from our conversation today, whether they're in perimenopause or not, what do you hope that they take from this conversation?
How about you realize that every woman is going to have very similar issues, challenges, and concerns. They may be a little different in the way they present, or they may be a little different in the dynamics, but ultimately, all of us are going through this. You're not alone.
Yes, I love it. Okay, so I hope that people have listened to this interview today and that they have loved it. I certainly loved it because I think this is one of the longest podcast interviews I have ever done. I just couldn't stop talking and there was so much to cover. I feel like we could even do a follow-up episodes at some point.
Great.
So if you are listening and you feel like this episode really resonated with you and you want to share it, send it to a friend who's going through perimenopause, send it to a friend whose husband is driving them crazy, send it to a friend who's just about to get married and be like, keep this in mind. And please leave us, some reviews, some likes, some ratings. It really does help the show get seen and shared with more women. And then we can, change more women's lives. And if you want to connect with Brooke, which I'm sure you're going to want to do after this, what are some ways people can find you? I think Instagram's pretty much your main hub these days.
Is I am a one trick pony. I don't know how to use all of the different social media platforms. And also, I just don't want to learn any more of the social media platforms. So I use
I love
Instagram.
it.
And I'm at marriage in perimenopause because that is exactly where it started.
Perfect. And I think that, yeah, when you go to her Instagram, you'll get so much information, so much free stuff. And then if you go to her link in bio, there's other, resources there that you can find. So I love this. This has been one of my favorite episodes. I can't wait for you to listen and let me know what you think about it. And of course, as always, remember, burnout is not your destiny. It's your wake up call.